Hello and welcome to episode number 8 of Performing Labor. My name is Rob Simons, and I am your host. This podcast features interviews with accomplished performing musicians who are doing interesting and creative work from within performing arts institutions and outside of them. We'll unpack their training, their practice, and their careers, how they got started, how they stay sharp, and their ambitions for the future. And it's my hope that these interviews will provide value no matter where you are on your musical journey. If you're thinking about a career in music, if you're in music school now, a working musician, or if you're a music lover and just curious to learn more. This week I sat down with my former colleague from the Phoenix Symphony, Jessica Guideri, whom I hadn't seen in about a decade. We overlapped in the Phoenix Symphony for a few seasons before we each went on to different orchestras, and as you'll hear in this interview, I was actually on her audition committee, and to this day, it's one of the finest auditions I've ever heard. Jessica came to Phoenix after being a member of the Fry Street Quartet that was in residence in Logan, Utah. And I remember thinking then about how her background as a chamber musician may have been a distinct competitive advantage, both in terms of her great audition, but also how she was able to contribute so much to the group from day one. And that might be instructive to think about, or rethink, the efficacy of the increasingly specialized training for orchestra jobs. And since Phoenix, she's gone on to win positions with the Seattle Symphony, the Pacific Symphony, the LA Opera, and now she's immersed in the LA studio scene and is the concertmaster of the Santa Barbara Symphony. For a long time, I really admired her capacity to keep moving, to make unpredictable choices, take on new challenges, and add value to different kinds of institutions. But undergirding all of this, of course, is that Jessica is a wicked good violinist. I listened to an interview recently, a conversation between two songwriters of different generations. And something that came to the surface was that the job of a songwriter is to stay inspired. Inspiration in that context is a professional necessity, something that must be actively cultivated. Accessing it, maybe as much as anything, is what separates amateurs from professionals. It reminded me of the line from Stephen Pressfield's book, The War of Art. I write only when inspiration strikes. Fortunately, it strikes every morning at 9 o'clock sharp. And if you haven't read the book, The War of Art, go order it right now. As we think about the professional side of creative work, as it's spread out over a career spanning many decades, routine is essential, but so is feedback. A songwriter, one who is writing, recording, touring their own music, has a feedback mechanism built in. There is the audience reaction to the new record as compared to the previous one. There are the types of venues you play and the head counts from year to year. But on a fundamental level, the songwriter has to carve out time each day or a chunk of the year to write. Because after the tour cycle is done, you've either done the work on the new material or you haven't. The pipeline is either primed or it's dry. But for an orchestra musician who is playing something in the neighborhood of 150 concerts a year, there really isn't an analogous external feedback mechanism. Growth isn't an essential link in the career or artistic chain. The work is very busy, and as Jessica observes, what I think are the symptoms and complications of the busyness. The good side being that across all the music we play, modern American orchestras possess great stylistic capacity. The underbelly can be a lack of accountability. My takeaway from this conversation is that some combination of Jessica's obvious passion for music making, her command of the instrument, the variety in her work portfolio that includes everything from blockbuster movies to chamber music, and some work-life balance is what keeps her accountable, inspired, moving forward, and progressing. Please enjoy this interview with Jessica Guideri. Jessica Guideri, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Rob. Nice to see you.
Likewise. So we're recording this in early to mid-July. My orchestra, the Rochester Philharmonic, we shut down in mid-March, and we got through some of the rest of our contract through a combination of the PPP loans and some of our donors. And we've launched on a number of innovations, trying to get music out there in one way or the other through education concerts or education programming, donor videos, live stream concerts. Tell me about some of the things that the Santa Barbara Symphony has done and how it's affected you guys.
Well, I think that the Santa Barbara Symphony was also a recipient of the PPP loans, and because of donations from donors, as of mid-March, the season shut down for us. We did not complete our concerts. But what has been done in the meantime is they've been showing archival concerts on video. And they've been asking musicians to create some videos, whether just a hello to the audience or a short performance to kind of bridge the gap a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So where did the archival videos come from? I know that a lot of orchestras have a bit of a deficit in this because we don't have that kind of material. Why do you guys have so much video of yourselves?
It's all recording, actually.
Oh, I
So
see. I see.
I mean, so they just they record every concert, and I do believe a lot of orchestras do that.
Yeah, that we have, and
Okay.
we at least here we're broadcasting through our local classical radio station. And
Yeah.
so, tell me about the video stuff that you guys are doing more individually.
Well, they're just asking us to, make some Zoom or a cappella, anything that we feel might be appropriate. And they compile a mini concert, I guess, for the audience, so that there's not such distance between the audience and the musicians during this time.
Mm-hmm. So I know that a lot of you guys in that orchestra also have careers in the recording studios too. So
Mm-hmm.
does there a little bit more competence in the Santa Barbara Symphony when it comes to recording yourself than the average orchestral musician?
Well, I don't know about that because we're not usually the ones to record ourselves.
Good
Usually
point.
it's someone else recording us. So I don't know.
So you personally, so this time has been so up and down for me, over these 4 months or so. Violinistically, I had some really great periods of productivity. I commissioned some short pieces and recorded those, but I also started taking some online classes. And as I ramped those up, my practicing diminished to like basic bare maintenance. How has this affected you and your practice?
Wow, you've been so productive, Rob.
Maybe.
I took off for a while, actually. For a while I was maintaining and I was practicing some things that I thought might be coming up, but with all the uncertainty of what actually is coming up, I ended up relaxing for a bit. So I guess, took a vacation longer than I've taken in years, and it's felt really great. But that's actually aside from. There has been some recording that I've been doing. There have been some movies and some TV shows that have still asked us to record from home when that was possible. So I was, and I'm lucky enough that I do have a recording studio at home to be able to do that. But let's see, other than that, I then started picking up practicing again about a month ago, and it's felt great to do so. And I guess focusing on basics and just things that I love. I find myself jumping around from piece to piece because I can't decide what I want to play more.
Mm-hmm. So did you have to work yourself up to taking the time off? I mean, did you have to make a negotiation with yourself about, am I going to do this?
No, that comes pretty easy to me, unfortunately. But I think it was really needed because before that it was so busy, knock on wood, that it was a much needed break.
The busyness was unexpected because like studios were busier, or what was going on that made it so busy?
Well, not unexpected, just kind of the norm has been really, really busy. The studios were there was a lot going on in the studios. Then with Santa Barbara, there were quite a few things. And I had a few chamber music concerts that were back to back. So there were several programs that I was working on at the same time.
So I do want to spend some time in this conversation to talk to you about the studio stuff. So this perhaps is a good time to get into it. Before we started recording, I asked you about the big setup you have behind you. And so you're recording some stuff from home. So I've worked a little bit in the studio setting, but I'm curious about how that works from your end, like on a nuts and bolts level. So are you getting a click track and you're just recording the violin part and you're sending it off to a producer?
You're getting the click track, you're getting the mock-up with the MIDI playing the part, and you're also getting, well, obviously the sheet music.
Mm-hmm.
Do
you think that are the parts being like multi-tracked? I mean, so obviously you can do multiple passes as a string section in the studio. In other words, are a few players creating the effect of a string section, or are these solo violin parts you're recording, or how's this working?
There are several players creating the effects of the section.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I don't know how many are creating the section, they tend to be smaller sections, obviously, because not everyone has the capability to record from home.
Gotcha.
And some people live in areas where it's too loud to record from
Of
home,
course,
even.
of course. Yeah, you see
So,
those people that do their podcasts, or that there's like their radio people, they do them from their closets. They're trying to find the closest approximation of a sound studio as they can. So
right.
obviously our industry is uniquely hit by this pandemic because it requires us to be together, not just with each other, but with audiences. However, you do hear about all these companies that are finding through this sort of natural experiment that we're in, they're finding that it is unlocking new possibilities in terms of working away from home. Do you think that there'll be any part of this recording from home that in a commercial sense that will persist going into a post-vaccine world?
I've wondered about that. Part of me hopes so because I spent the money on creating a studio, but the other part of me really hopes not because there are far fewer people working. But I do think that the studios are saving a lot of money by not having to rent an actual space, not having to pay certain people to actually do the work, because the musicians are having to do some work that maybe we wouldn't normally do if we were just going to Fox, for example.
What types of things would you not normally be doing that you're doing now?
Well, like working Pro Tools,
Oh, I see. Oh, I see.
running the recording itself. I would never have to do it. I would never normally have to worry about getting it done on time because it's someone else's. I would just,
I see your point.
when the clock is done, the clock is done. So.
Yeah, I read somewhere a couple of days ago about the extent to which the filming industry has slowed down, but that we're running out of new material, right? So we're all stuck at home, and we're all avid consumers of the streaming services, and I think we are kind of getting to the bottom of the barrel, not quality-wise, but in terms of just quantity of things. So it seems to me that there would be an opportunity to figure out a solution to ramp it up. I think I read that the film industry in Los Angeles alone is like $49 billion. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
But they're starting to, there are sessions scheduled there are sessions on the books now already. So we'll see.
How far in advance?
Well, next week.
Oh, wow. So like you're going to get together with other people and play music.
Yeah, so we're going to see how that goes. We have lots of forms that we have to sign and read in advance, and like preparation that we need to take. So
that's great. Yeah, I told you before we started recording that I saw that back in Indianapolis, where I used to live, that that recording industry is starting to start back up, and I think that it gives me a little bit of optimism. When there's a real financial incentive for the studios and for the players and everybody involved, there seems to be a real spark to find some creativity to problem solve, where in other places it can be a little bit more complacent.
Interesting.
And do any films or any projects that you've worked on over the years really stand out as like real highlights?
I worked on the last few Star Wars movies, and those were really incredible to work with John Williams and just to be part of that saga, something that I've grown up with, and just to be part of something that huge was really incredible. And the very first time that the Princess Leia theme was played, like in the studios, was recorded in the studios. I don't remember for which Star Wars that was, but the first one that was done in the United States, like there were tears in people's eyes, including my own. It was just incredible to hear.
Yeah, it's something that it would be really hard to go back and explain that to your younger self. When you get to be a part of something that has touched people's lives. I mean, obviously wasn't on those recordings, but the closest I can come is when John Williams came to conduct the Louisville Orchestra a few years ago, and the reception that he got in the hall was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Yeah. Like, I mean, it was like President Obama had come out on stage, like in 2008, maybe not when he left office, but yeah. And the other one was when I left the Phoenix Symphony, I went out and did the Star Wars and concert tour, where we toured all over North America and would play for like tens of thousands of people a night. And it was a good show. A lot of LA folks on that tour. In fact, we sat down for a couple nights at the Nokia Theater in Los Angeles towards the beginning, and Maestro Williams was there. But yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say that when you're thinking about all the ambitions you have in your 20s or in your teens and you're in the practice room, that you would get to be a part of that, and that would be such a meaningful experience.
Yeah, and I didn't even realize that it was a thing that you could do to actually play soundtracks for movies and TV. Like, it was completely not on my radar at all. And now whenever I watch TV or I'm watching a movie, I'm constantly listening to the music.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, you've been in LA now, you've been in California now for about a decade. I feel it seems to me like anecdotally, or at least from my perception, is that the industry has been picking up. Maybe obviously everyone's in a lull now, but it seems like there's been more coming out of Los Angeles and California in terms of homemade productions. Maybe that's what you're alluding to, that this was the first Star Wars production made in the States.
Mm. Well, it depends who you ask. A lot of people will say, oh, there's less and less and less work. And then some people are saying, oh, this is ramping up. We're figuring out how to make this work. So to be honest, I just kind of go with what I'm seeing in front of me. And for me personally, I feel like I've been very lucky to have been kept busy with studio work.
Mm-hmm. So let's dial the clock back quite a bit. You have some very successful siblings in the music business too. So you come from a very musical family, obviously. I want to hear about your early life. What kind of music was in the house? What was your parents' relationship with music like?
Well, my mom is a cellist, and she was the one that really pushed us to practice, and she was really the impetus behind it all. My dad liked to say he played the radio. But yeah, I mean, my brother is Lucas is in the Florida Orchestra. He's associate principal, second violin, and my sister is Danielle is in the section, at the Colorado Symphony. And I mean, we grew up playing in the Guideri trio together. We had a little trio when we were, I don't know, 9, 7, and 5. Yeah, that makes sense. 9, 7, and 5. And my mom would practice. Bless her soul. She would practice with all three of us all the time. Well, every day anyway.
Was she a working musician or an educator?
Yeah, she taught a lot. She played in the Long Island Philharmonic, which I belonged to for a while as well. We played in there at the same time, which was really great, before I left New York. And she was instrumental, pun intended.
So you obviously, you're the oldest, and then you went off to college. Did Danielle follow you to school? No, we were all in the pre-college program, right?
And then at Juilliard, and then I actually my first year I went to Columbia. I did the Columbia and Juilliard dual degree program. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a violinist or not, and then after the first year, I took an indefinite leave from Columbia and went back to Juilliard. But Danielle ended up going to the Aaron Copland School of Music at Queens College.
So I'm curious about the college experience, especially making that choice and that transition between a liberal arts school and a conservatory. Can you compare and contrast those two experiences for me?
Well, yeah, the Columbia was, okay, so I spent my freshman year of Columbia really kind of coming out of my shell, shall we say. And when I went to Juilliard, I had gotten that out of my system. But as far as classes go, I mean, it was a real shock to the system to go from an Ivy League school with very strenuous classes to Juilliard, where the focus was on playing the instrument. So all the other classes that you would take, like literature, humanities, and things like that, were taken way less seriously by the students, which really affected everyone.
You're actually, I didn't know that about you, about that you went to Columbia, and you're actually my second guest on this who did that program. Actually, I had Gabe Lefkowitz, who's the
Oh,
concertmaster of the Louisville Orchestra. I think he
uh-huh.
just went to Columbia and then went to grad school at Juilliard. I think he was
Oh,
taking
okay.
violin lessons at while he was in undergrad. I asked him if he felt like going to Juilliard was more rigorous in a way, and he was more, I think, of the opinion that it was just so different that it was impossible to really put your thumb on that. However, I'm curious about your experience in college and like in terms of did you feel like it was an effective, I mean, obviously you were focused. Did you feel like it was an effective program? Did you feel like music school got you to where you needed to be?
Yes, I do actually, because I think that if I if I wanted to be a musician, which I did, I needed to know how to play the instrument. And that is what I learned at school, how to play the instrument, how to really get around it, and how to express myself musically. Because I feel like you can only express yourself musically if you have some sort of freedom on the instrument. So yeah, I do feel like it has it gave me what I needed.
Yeah, because I've had a couple of guests on where we've talked about how compressed that time is, and it forces you in one hand to be hopefully the best version of yourself, but somehow it also can feel a little bit inadequate. Um, and I've been thinking about how that translates into your first work. Your first work, as I understand it, was as a violinist in a string quartet. So did you realize in college, like that's where you wanted to be, or how did that work out that you made it to a string quartet?
Well, yes, I did. I did know that I wanted to be in a string quartet, and I just kept putting that out into the universe. You know, the did you ever read The Artist's Way
Yeah,
by
absolutely.
Julia Cameron? So she would say, you know, you put. I don't remember very much about that book at all, to be honest, but I do remember that she would say that you put something out into the universe, it will hear you and it will come to you eventually. I mean, you also work for it, but so I kept putting that out, and it just so happens that string quartet. I mean, the string quartet world is mostly word of mouth. It happens. So putting it out into the universe in this case was good because people knew that I
Mhm.
wanted to be in a string quartet. So I got a call from the Fry Street Quartet, you know, that I if I wanted to come out and audition with them, and I did. And I believe as part of that, we even played a few educational concerts, and we played a concert for an audience and stuff too. Um, and turned out that we liked each other. And at that time, they were in North Carolina, so I decided to join.
Mhm.
But soon after that, actually, I think my audition with them. Oh no, my first concert with them was their audition for Utah State University, which is where they are now.
Oh, wow. So you basically left New York to go and to move to Ogden
To Logan,
or to
yes,
Logan, Utah.
yes,
Right. Sorry.
yeah, yes,
Um,
I did. It was quite a culture shock.
and so when you started that gig, about how many concerts a year were they playing?
Oh boy, um, I don't know. Oh, I think that first year we had an international tour to the Balkan states, like sponsored by Carnegie Hall and the State Department, I believe. So that was a lot, but there was also teaching involved in this
Hmm.
residency.
I'm interested because I've never done that kind of work seriously. It's really not a residency. How did you feel about your connection with the place? So obviously you have a teaching load of some kind, and you probably give a certain number of concerts each year at the university. Did you
Mhm.
feel pretty connected to Logan as a place? I mean, did you feel connected to an audience there, something outside of the university?
Yes, I did because most of the same people would come to the concerts. Like we had quite a following. And I actually, one of the things that I found that was a little bit was a little bit difficult for me was that coming from the anonymity of New York City and going to a small town and not being anonymous. So that was really great, but also, kind of an adjustment. Um,
That's super interesting. And so what do you attribute that to in terms of the
not-
notoriety? Obviously you guys we play great, but um, I'm curious if you were new to town, how did people find out about you guys, and what do you attribute your success to in that place?
well, I think that it was a college town, so people, and we were doing programs in schools, and the university advertised us to a point, and with our concerts and with the students that we had, people very quickly found out that there
Mhm.
was a new group in town.
Was there a predecessor? I mean, was there a quartet that had left, or did you start a program?
There was a quartet that had left, which I right now off the top of my head is not.
So it's okay. It's okay. So obviously there's it's an incredibly different lifestyle playing in orchestra as it is in a quartet. What were some of the trade-offs in terms of quartet life? What were some of the good things that you miss, and what are some of the parts that you were happy to leave behind you?
The good parts, the camaraderie and feeling of family in the quartet. I mean, it was really having a relationship between the four players, but that was also a bad part. So, what else? Ask me the question again, Rob. I don't
It's okay.
remember.
Don't worry. No worries. So I'll try a different way.
Okay.
My previous guest was Matt Albert, who's one of the founding members of Eighth Blackbird.
Yeah, sure.
And
I know.
he now teaches at University in Michigan. And he was saying that one of the things that he's been really asking himself during this quarantine, as they're thinking about how they're going to teach chamber music, is what are they really teaching? What skills are they really teaching these kids? And he thinks that one of the main things they're doing is teaching conflict resolution and consensus building. And so that is a big part of what you're describing, is that like the interpersonal thing is actually one of the trickiest things to navigate over time. So it can be both the good thing and the bad thing.
Absolutely. And I think also in quartet, there's an ownership in quartet that is different from the ownership as being part of an orchestra, especially in a string section. And the accountability is different as well.
Sure.
I feel like in an orchestra, you really have to be on yourself to be up with the part. I mean, to know the part and to know the piece and to be able to play it. And in a quartet, it shows very quickly if you are not doing that. Whereas in an orchestra, you can kind of hide behind the other players. Wind players, not so much. It doesn't work that much. But for string players, I really think this is true.
We got to know each other in the Phoenix Symphony, and I was actually on your audition committee. And I remember it very clearly because it reminds me of like that picture of Secretariat, in like the 70s when he won. There was like, he won by 21 lengths or whatever. I don't know if that's a real number, but there was a second place finisher, but they weren't in the same race. And that's kind of how your audition was. It was really just an incredibly polished performance of this repertoire. And I had sat on a number of auditions at that point in the Phoenix Symphony and elsewhere. But I often thought of that audition and thought of you as someone that was really forged in that string quartet literature and that accountability that you're talking about. And I think that the sort of the narrative I have about you is that experience made you an incredible auditioner, but also a great orchestral violinist. Whereas somebody like me coming up very much myopically focused on auditions and learning the standard repertoire kind of made me maybe more of an example and you being an exception. I'm curious if you thought that your quartet skills transferred really easily to playing in a full-time orchestra.
I do think that they transfer very easily because really, as long as you're playing rhythmically and you're able to blend two things that are very important in quartet playing, you will fit well into an orchestra. Am I missing other components? I'm trying to think.
I mean, it's sometimes people, when they join an orchestra for the first time, they might have been a little younger than you were at that point because that would be their first job. There's often a bit of a catching up point. So for me, as an example, out of college, I was pretty green when I left grad school. I did a year of touring of musical theater, and I realized I actually had a really good time and made some money, but I realized I didn't want to do that. So I got super serious about orchestra auditions. And I was in the Richmond Symphony for 3 seasons before I joined the Phoenix Symphony.
Hmm.
And what I learned in that time was like some of the stuff that I would never have known that I wasn't going to be good at, like pop shows. Like
Oh,
I didn't know any of the tunes. A lot of the music was barely legible, right? So that was like one of the learning experiences. Another experiences that I hadn't had in college that I had to learn was like, if a Russian ballet comes up and you're playing first fiddle on that, you better get way ahead of it. Now, I play second violin and I've been playing second violin for 15 years. So I haven't had that experience, but I mean, those were things that are hard to teach. In some ways, I think that period after college and in your first job is where you really get formed. And I think of you as being really formed in playing like a string quartet at a really high level. And you brought that to the orchestra.
interesting. You know what? I just remembered something that you said to me at the Phoenix Symphony within the first year that I was there, because I remember complaining about that maybe it was a pops show, I don't remember, but I remember complaining about the fact that by the time we get to an end of the movement, I can't remember the parts that I messed up, the parts that I needed to practice. And I remember
Right?
you're like, oh, it gets easier. You start to remember.
Yeah. It is. It's funny because the job is so surprising in some ways, you know. And if you come into a group where there's a big turnover, you really see it. So when I joined the Richmond Symphony, like I said, I was actually a part of a big new class of players that came in, and we were playing the Nutcracker. And that was one of those things where the orchestra had been doing it with the same conductor and the same company for years and years and years. It was a plug and play situation. When you had 20 new players in the group, it wasn't. And they had to schedule another rehearsal because it was a mess. Right?
So funny.
Again, like that was sort of the Nutcracker isn't that hard. Obviously, when we had like, you know, Cinderella and things like that, it was really, really hard those first few years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have any other surprises about playing an orchestra? I mean, anything else that you didn't expect, like in a full-time 6-day-a-week kind of orchestra like Phoenix is?
Well, you know, I remember being really impressed by the changes in style that people just automatically would make. It was probably going from something like Tchaikovsky or Sibelius to Mozart, and I was really pleasantly surprised at how everyone's style would change. Like I hadn't experienced that before playing in an orchestra. And I guess my experience there until then had been, music festivals and school. So where people don't do that. Anyway, that was interesting.
Yeah, I have a vivid memory when I joined in 2004, and one of the first concerts I played, it might have actually been the very first concert. It was a season preview, and it was, you know, excerpts or movements of pieces from across the upcoming season. And we didn't have much rehearsal. I mean, the orchestra sounded fine, but we got to the Magnificent Seven, and it was a piece of the orchestra recorded in the 80s, and like the group just like lit up. I mean, the sound exploded off the stage. I found out after the fact about the recording, and it was like a big piece for the orchestra. But again, like of all the pieces, I thought that I was joining this group and they'd have this great tradition with it. Wasn't the Magnificent Seven. So after Phoenix, you went off to California and you joined the Pacific Symphony.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of curious about that group because I don't know much about it. And it's in a part of the country. So it's in Orange County, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's in kind of a suburban, they might not self-describe as a suburban, but it is, right? And it's a relatively young orchestra in that it's like only 40 something years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if there was anything palpably different about playing in a group like that wasn't in one of the larger metropolitan areas, that wasn't a group that was 75, 100 years old, that had a long tradition.
Okay, LA is pretty much a suburb, right? With the exception of downtown. Would you consider all of LA a suburb? Because Orange County is just an extension of that, in my opinion. So it's actually it's no less dense than LA, and there's a lot going on down there. So I never felt like I was in anything less, especially coming from Utah, actually, now that I think about it. But I didn't notice a difference with being a younger orchestra, but I did notice the difference of being a freelance orchestra as opposed to a full-time
Mm-hmm.
orchestra. And that people were maybe slightly less friendly at the beginning, although now I have great friends from that orchestra. But, people are more protective of what they've got, their work that's going on. And, coming in as a new person.
Do most of the players live in Orange County, or do they commute down from
They
Los
mostly
Angeles?
commute down from LA, or some people from San Diego, which is what I was doing at the time.
And what was life like in San Diego then?
Well, I mean, for me, one of the reasons I left Phoenix was to be in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in a long distance relationship in I was in Phoenix and he wasn't, and we got engaged, and we decided that the first person, or the person to get the job, wherever that was, that's where we would both move. And then we both got jobs. I won a job in the Seattle Symphony, and he got a job in San Diego.
I forgot that.
At San Diego State. And so then that was like, okay, that's actually further maybe than Utah to Arizona. And so we decided that there was more for me to do in Southern California than for him to do in Seattle, or in Washington. And so when I already was planning to move to California without the Pacific Symphony job. So the Pacific, and then I saw the ad in the paper, which, by the way, for years before that, even before I was considering auditioning, we used to get the union paper at home because my mom was in the union, and my dad would always show me these auditions for this orchestra called Pacific Symphony, and anyway, and so the fact that I ended up in it is very odd. But so anyway, so I was moving to California, and then I saw that there was an opening at Pacific, and so that was a really pressure-filled audition for me because otherwise I wasn't going to have anything in California. So, and I even remember, I think the day or two before the audition, I just totally broke down, and I was like, I'm not going to be able to, I can't do it. I'm not even going to take it. Forget it. I'm done. And so I took the day off, and I went to see a movie, and I had dinner and had lunch, and then somehow I got the audition. But in the process was funny also, because the last round that I played, they didn't ask for the last excerpt. So I was like, shoot. That's it, because usually that's the kiss of death, right? If they don't hear everything. But I guess I
don't know about that. I know that I've got lots of committees that, especially when I'm running them, I have to, I'm being very.
You cut it off when you know.
Well, I look around the room and I get my show of hands from my peers, and often the better it is, the less they want to hear. Let's keep this thing going. Let's keep this.
Okay, good. That's awesome.
Let's keep this thing going.
Well, I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah, I found it in Louisville, especially. That the other string principals really wanted to, if they listened to a lot of it, it was because we were unsure.
I see.
If they made a pretty quick decision, more often than not. So were you working at all in San Diego, and were you playing with the San Diego Symphony at all?
I was doing a little bit of subbing, but my main thing, I was living in San Diego because of my husband at the time. So my main thing was driving up to Pacific Symphony.
Sure. The San Diego Symphony is a group that has made such an amazing turn for the better in the past, like 10, 15 years. They got all that money. It was from Oracle, I think, Oracle, the family, and they spent it wisely.
I think it's great what they've done.
So you must have made contacts in Pacific Symphony that facilitated your move to Los Angeles. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I guess so, because all of a sudden I got a call for studio work. But what was funny about that, I was in New York at the time playing concerts with another group, and I wasn't able to make it. And I couldn't believe it, because here was my chance, and it was going to, and they say you have to say yes to studio work. And I couldn't say yes because I was on the other side of the country. But luckily they called me back, and it's been steady for me ever since.
And then you joined the LA Opera as assistant concertmaster, and you were there for 4 years?
Yeah, actually, I first joined as principal second. And that was, and I was principal second for, I don't know how many years, but maybe a year and a half, 2 years. And then the associate concertmaster position opened, and I took that audition, and I and I got that, and I was there for a while.
Did you enjoy that work? I mean, it's a very different relationship being in an opera orchestra, I think, versus a symphony orchestra. I mean, is that something that you had a preference for, or is it just so different that it's hard to compare?
It's so different. It was definitely a different style of playing, because if you play an entire opera the way you would a symphony concert or a string quartet concert, you wouldn't have any arms left for the next day, so, but yeah.
It's funny. I just remembered, I think it was somebody from the San Francisco Opera years ago. I remember reading in a magazine somewhere that they like kept their bridge super low, and they cut the nut down so the string tension was really low on the instrument. So yeah, so putting your fingers down was as easy as possible to save themselves. That person, now that I think of it, actually, I think they might have been doing both the ballet and the opera. But the point being that the pit work is really, really taxing, and you have to find whatever comparative advantage you have to save your fingers and joints.
It's true.
And so now you're concertmaster of the Santa Barbara Symphony. So tell me about your responsibilities up there and what that whole scene is like. It's a really good organization. I'm really happy to be part of it. A lot of the players, again, are commuting up from LA. It's a great group of players, great group of people, and the audience is tremendously supportive of the symphony. I play with the orchestra regularly, concertos and things like that, and I try to do extras whenever I'm asked and whenever I can make that happen. So do you get to play concerto every season?
Not every season, but close. Yeah, and sometimes smaller things, not quite a concerto, but like a little piece with the orchestra.
And so I'm thinking here in Rochester, obviously we share a lot of space with the Eastman School of Music, and we have some members that teach in the school, but we don't always have the best relationship or the most fluid relationship. And I'm curious, how about the musical culture in Santa Barbara, and how you guys fit in versus the Music Academy of the West, or is it just no overlap at all?
I don't think there's much overlap at all, to be honest. I would love for there to be more overlap, but there are some people who are in the orchestra who are also at the academy. As far as institutions go, they don't overlap.
And so the Santa Barbara Symphony and your relationship with it's pretty stable, and obviously you're commuting up. How long a drive is that?
Oh, it's long. It's I haven't done it in a while now, but sure. I would say hour and a half, 2 hours, with no traffic.
And most of the people that play in that orchestra are like you, coming up from LA.
Yes.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
So does that constrain the growth of the group in itself, because the body of players is from out of town?
You mean as far as other concerts go, like educational concerts?
If the orchestra were going to expand, let's say they were going to add a couple of weeks next season, which would be wildly optimistic for any of us now, but I'm just trying to get a sense of like the workload, and if the situation you're in kind of prevents a whole lot of change there. So the orchestra, I think, like you said, it's a great place to work. It's very stable. You probably have a really good, loyal audience. I had read that you moved into a nice new theater relatively recently. I'm just trying to understand how the labor force affects that they're mostly out of town, how that affects the institution downstream.
Well, I think that people would love for there to be, I think that musicians would love for there to be more concerts. A lot of the musicians are able to stay with donors while we're up there. So that makes it kind of like a camp situation in a way, right? You go, or vacation with some rehearsals and a couple concerts. So that lightens the commute factor, for sure. Although sometimes So most of the times I will stay up at least 1 or 2 nights during a Santa Barbara week. Sometimes I'll make the drive back and forth depending on what's happening in the studios that week.
So I'm going to use the word commute to pivot to living in Los Angeles. So obviously the notorious for your traffic, among other things. But so tell me how life has changed in Los Angeles since the lockdown in terms of, because I'm thinking particularly of those really famous, maybe you didn't know that they're famous, but the famous pictures of the crystal clear Los Angeles skyline with no exhaust pollution. So I'm curious, do you think that some of these changes, you see these pictures of these empty highways, and is it going to change the culture of Angelenos to make them a little bit more neighborhood focused, maybe more mass transit focused?
I mean, I do think that there will be more people working from home for sure. And I think that it was going that way, and maybe not in the musician community, but just in general. I think maybe it was going that way already before this pandemic. But I don't think that I mean, right now there's like no traffic. It's amazing to go anywhere. But I don't think that will stay, because I think there are too many things that need bodies in them. I don't think that everything will become work from home for sure. I moved to an area that is kind of away from the city. I'm kind of up in the mountains, away from everything. And I just have to expect, when there's not a pandemic, that there's traffic. So anywhere I go, I just expect that it's going to take me a while to get there.
Yeah, I saw that the Los Angeles economy is kind of uniquely hit by this because there's such a high degree of people in the creative fields, and so many people that are working in the what would be, I guess, the creative gig economy, and that there's so much work that people can put together a sequence of things that it wouldn't be possible anywhere else except for maybe New York City. And I'm curious though, have you seen any indication of people leaving Los Angeles? I mean, you read about these, I've been reading about San Francisco. I have a little bit more of a relationship with Northern California than I do with Southern California. And things are really changing in San Francisco. Like people are really moving out. Like, even though the work up there hasn't been that affected because, it's software and people can work from home. It's not like our work or creative work.
Yeah.
But rents have dropped in some parts of the city by like between 10 and 15%.
Wow.
And then people talk about, you go out and see all these moving trucks in the street just because people are saying like, I can do this job from someplace else. I can live farther away. I don't have to be able to walk to my tech office or whatever. I'm just curious, are you seeing any kind of indications that life is changing like that in Los Angeles?
No, I'm not actually.
Good.
Yeah, it is. It is good. But yeah, so I have not met as many people that work from home and, just don't really have a job. They do a whole bunch of different things that create what they do. I've never experienced that before moving to LA. It's been really
it's there's no real close second in the United States in terms of people that do that kind of work. It's such a big part of the economy. I was listening to an interview the other day with Richard Florida. He's the urban planner, and someone was asking him about what city he thought had the biggest chance of making a comeback or the most robust comeback. And he ticked off a bunch of Sunbelt cities: Houston, Miami, Dallas, Austin, those things that we all hear about. And he said, if he were 25, he would move to New York City. He still thinks that it's the best opportunity for, if you're a young person, it's still the best opportunity to find great work, to get connected, and to find a mate. But he said if he had to make a bet on the city coming back the strongest, he said LA. And which is interesting is that
from the pandemic.
From the pandemic, but also the economic fallout.
Okay.
And he also said that after the 1918 pandemic, the Spanish flu, that LA saw the biggest population growth of any American city. So, so something to look forward to. You have even more neighbors.
More traffic, more people.
So your husband is in the video game industry.
Yeah.
How connected do you feel to the other parts to LA? Like, do you feel connected to his work? Is there a community of people that you've met through them? I mean, what's your sense of community like in LA and where you live?
Um, I am mostly connected to the musical community, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Video games only a little bit because of him. Yeah, I mean, I've met a bunch of people. I mean, he works at a company that makes games for PlayStation. So I've met a bunch of artists and IT people and people who make those games. But otherwise, I actually oddly have not met anyone involved in the musical aspect of even his game, for
Mm-hmm.
that matter. I mean, I've played in a bunch of, like E3 and things like that, video game conferences in LA. Other than that, I don't
Interesting.
feel connected to that at all.
Yeah, I know a good portion of that music is recorded in Nashville.
Hmm.
Like that's one of the hot spots for the video game recording industry.
Yeah.
So you were saying before, a little bit before, that you feel that LA is just a big connection of different neighborhoods and different areas. So I think that I read LA County is larger than like 23 states.
Is
So
that right?
yeah, at least in terms of population. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, that was being touted around when your mayor was considering running for president, that no one would turn their nose up at a governor, right, running for president, but the mayor of New York, or the mayor of Los Angeles, has a bigger constituency than 23 governors.
Wow.
Yeah. So, when we lived in Phoenix together, I felt like what was interesting about that spread out culture is that there are lots of pockets to go and play, right? There's lots of, like, say everyone has a little bit of a neighborhood, so they don't have to fight the traffic or drive 30 miles to get across town. So are there little chamber music opportunities and things like that to play smaller venues around the city that have their own pockets of audiences?
Yes, there absolutely are, and I'm actually thinking of creating one.
Oh yeah, tell me about
So,
that.
well, I live in as I said, like kind of a mountain community that is pretty much far away from everything. Like you wouldn't think I lived in LA, especially during this pandemic. If I don't leave the area, I don't feel like I live in LA at all.
Hmm.
I feel like I live in a place that's even more rural than when I lived in Utah, actually.
Interesting.
Um, so I'm trying to create, even though it's an artist community, but I'm trying to create outlet here that I don't think exists. So I mean, we'll see what happens. I'll keep you posted.
Sure, but what are your ambitions for it? What's a pie in the sky scenario for this enterprise?
Oh, I just want it to be a neighborhood kind of feel. I want it to have a really relaxed. I want people to say, "Oh, there's this concert happening. Oh, let's go." I just want it to be a relaxed kind of hippy dippy type situation
Hmm.
where there's really no disconnect between the audience and the players. I haven't really figured out exactly what I want yet, but I figure I'll just start it and then figure it out as I go.
Are there spaces that you have in mind? I mean, are there art galleries or, I mean, near where you are that you could use?
Yeah, there's a space that I have in mind that has a beautiful view and has a deck, and I've really pinpointed that,
Hmm.
I think, as my space.
I mean, you said that you get to play some chamber music, but obviously a part of your personal artistic equilibrium is having chamber music in your life. So obviously taking on a project like this would probably benefit you as an artist, right? Not just fulfill like maybe some need in the community too.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely. In fact, that's maybe the thing I miss most, and probably most musicians would agree with me, is just playing with other people. And the smallest way to do that is through chamber music.
Hmm.
And yeah, so it absolutely would fulfill my need for that.
It's hard to think that chamber music won't play a leading role for our art form as we come out of this pandemic, because the way I see it is that chamber music audiences are pretty passionate about the form. Maybe it's a smaller number, obviously, than it is for the orchestra or the opera, but those folks are usually tend to be pretty activated. And the small group factor, right? Like the expectation is lower, maybe even like before the vaccine comes out, because I mean, we were thinking about like when we're trying to problem solve for the orchestra, obviously, look here, you got 75 people, that's already a problem. You got 1,200 people, that's a huge, it's a huge problem. That's really hard to solve. And the economic part of that puzzle is really hard to solve too. But the chamber music thing, I think the combination of the more hardy folks, and then just the numbers make it possible that the first thing that we're going to be able to start presenting to the public and offer people something to do will be through chamber music. So get going on that.
Yeah, I know. I got to get moving.
Well, Jessica, I think this is a good place to kind of wrap this up. Do you have any recommendations on great listening, books, TV?
No, but I recommend walking outside and riding your bicycle.
That is an excellent recommendation. My wife and I have, my big transformation in this pandemic is that I get up at 4:30 now, and I get a couple hours of work done, and then Louise gets up and we go for a 1 hour walk between 7 and 8 a.m. And I hope that no matter what happens, even the worst Rochester winter, that we're able to maintain doing that.
Yeah, you might want to get some treadmills.
I know, right? The winter here is no joke, but it's not as bad as people say. It's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Let's put it that way.
So you're getting up at 4:30?
Yeah.
In the morning? Wow.
Yeah. I started getting up early for work so that I could go to the gym before work and get like a good 45-minute warm up before the downbeat at 9:30. Mm-hmm. And then when the pandemic came, I was like, well, the weather's getting better. The sun's coming up earlier. I'm going to get up even earlier. And then I found that having a couple of hours to myself in the morning, and then being able to, and I was like I said earlier, I'm doing courses. So getting that out of the way and then being able to do some practicing and then being done by 6 or 7 at night, like really being done. That's with awesome. All the Zoom calls and all the emails. It's actually pretty liberating. Yeah. Another thing my 18-year-old self would never have believed about the future. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for taking the time. It was really, really great to catch up with you.
Thank you. Likewise, Rob. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening. The music on the show, as always, is by Craig Wagner, an incredible guitarist from Louisville, Kentucky. We'll be back soon with more interviews. The next one features New England cellist Leo Iguchi, who is the principal cellist of the New Bedford Symphony, a member of the Pro Arte Chamber Orchestra, the New Hampshire Music Festival, and the Portland Symphony, and also is the founder of the Willamette Valley Chamber Music Festival in Oregon. So please go ahead and hit subscribe.